When I was somewhere around 4 years old, I had an experience that has become one of my most vivid memories of my childhood. My mum had put me to bed and went to my sister's room to get us situated for the night. I could hear them talking clearly as I wrestled with the monstrously heavy quilt to get myself ready to go to sleep. My mum had decorated this room, as she had for all of the rooms in the house, with antiques and various oddball decorative embellishments. My room was painted in an odd cross between a light beige and a light green that always reminded me of a watered-down goose poop. The bed was an old rope bed that had been converted to be able to accommodate a regular, double-sized mattress, and during the winter was draped with the most beautiful and heaviest crazy quilt I've ever seen. At the foot of the bed was an old rectangular steamer trunk. Ironically enough, it's against the floor of my office, about 2 feet from where I'm typing this. It's one of the few objects that I've been able to keep a hold of during my more than chaotic lifetime. On this night, my eyes were drawn to the foot of the bed. I saw something glowing, something that my child's mind could not comprehend at first glance. I sat up quickly and saw 3 glowing heads. They resembled the styrofoam mannequin heads used to display wigs, but they were glowing with a white luminescence that emanated from within, but not really bright enough to shed light on the rest of the room. The heads were featureless and smooth, and I could only see the lower half through the spooled spindles of the footboard, but the tops of the heads were fully visible above it. In my room, there was silence. I could still hear my mother and sister talking in the next room. The light from the hallway spilled in through the 2 or 3 inch gap of my partially open bedroom door. I tried to scream for my mom, but a high-pitched whistle was the only sound that escaped. I could barely breathe, let alone scream. The heads were still there, still glowing and still silent. I finally inhaled deeply and let loose a scream that caused my sister to scream and my mom to drop whatever she was holding onto the white shag-carpeted floor with a muffled thump. She ran into the hallway and threw open my door, allowing the large wrought iron and milk glass pendant light that hung over the stairwell to flood my room with light, and the luminous heads were gone. I finally let go, bawling my eyes out and trying to explain to my mom what I saw. She looked at the end of the bed and even went as far as opening the trunk, but I believe in hindsight that this was more to console me than anything else. She sat at the edge of my bed and told me that those were probably my guardian angels watching over me, and that there was nothing to worry about. I was finally able to go to sleep, partially from my mother calming me, but mostly from the resilient temporary amnesia that all children seem to possess in the face of fear. This, however, stuck with me, and it's one of my first memories that I can recall with utter clarity. I know that memories are malleable things, but this one stands out with the level of details that I remembered. I was actually talking with my mother about this some years back, and she didn't recall any of it. She also said she believed that the light fixture I was talking about wasn't even purchased until the late 70s, but this was proven to be untrue. As I was going through a photo album with my kids, there was a picture of me sitting at the top of the stairs, with the massive light fixture visibly hanging down. It was dated September 1970, which would have been right before the incident I just recounted. This incident could just be thought off as a childhood bogeyman encounter that resolved itself as nothing more than the overactive imagination of a child projecting their fears into the darkness. I could have even left it at that if it wasn't for incidents that occurred in 1983, as I was in the middle of my teenage years. Incidents that have remained unexplainable to this day. I'm trying to write all of these memories down as I'm getting older, and want to get them out while they still remain clear in my head. I've had a few unexplainable experiences before, but they've always been few and far between, ranging from when I was a small child and into teenage years and young adulthood. However, as I went through my early and mid-20s, I had fewer strange experiences and overall became less spiritually inclined. Didn't really believe in that sort of stuff, or didn't want to. I'm not going to get into the past experiences or why I started not believing in this stuff, but just know for background that it happened. The past few nights have been a slap in the face and has brought everything back to a deep-seated fear of myself. I usually stay up very late, Midnight, 1, 2, or even 3 a.m. is normal for me to stay up till. Generally, when I do go to bed, I'm very tired and just pass right out. These past few nights, I've been barely able to sleep. It started a few days ago at about 1 a.m. when I laid down to sleep. I got comfy and closed my eyes, but didn't fall asleep. Instead, my body started feeling strange. It began with heat building up over my stomach and lower abdomen. The heat intensified until it felt like someone had built a fire on top of me. The rest of my body felt cool, so I knew it wasn't just me getting too hot under the blanket. And mind you, it's about 55 or 60 degrees in my room when I sleep. This wasn't the first time I had that kind of sensation, and I thought to myself, maybe I should just relax and let whatever is to happen this time. So I relaxed and didn't fight it. The heat spread across my body, to my limbs, and then everything started to vibrate. I use the word vibrate, but it's a bad descriptor for what the sensation was. I simply lack a better word to describe it. My body itself was not physically moving or trembling, rather it felt like everything around me was thrumming and vibrating, with a metered pulsing kind of feeling. This too, I had felt many years ago when I was meditating. So again, I just kept relaxing and let it happen. The vibrations got more intense, and then I started seeing an orb of light above me, even though my eyes were closed. It moved and shifted colours between a purplish to a white. I opened my eyes, but only saw the darkness of the room around me. I thought maybe it's just my mind being weird, and closed my eyes again. Then I heard a sound to my right, near my computer. It was like a snapping sort of clatter noise, like something hit plastic. I sat up and looked around, but again I saw nothing. At this point, I started getting a little freaked out, but my dog, who sleeps in the bed with me, was resting contently, as if nothing was wrong, and he had heard nothing. So again, I thought I was just being paranoid, and my mind was playing tricks. So I laid back down. Almost immediately, the sensations returned along with the light moving above me. This time, I felt an odd touch along my forehead and the sides of my head, like something was grabbing me. Then I felt something shock me, like a jolt of electricity touching my leg and then my arm. I thought to myself, okay, something is not right here, and decided maybe there was something there besides my dog. My older sister had given me a small pouch of stones and said she had cleansed them and they would give me good dreams and stuff like that. So I thought, maybe I should grab that pouch. I heard in my mind, no, that's a bad idea. Don't do that. At that point, I got really freaked out because it wasn't my own thought, at least. I don't think it was. Why would I think to grab the stones but then immediately tell myself no? It was strange. So I grabbed the pouch of stones and held it to my chest while I lay back in bed. The heat was then gone from my body and concentrated in my hand that was holding the stones. It grew even more intense than before, and I had to use all of my willpower to not throw the pouch off me, because it felt like burning coal on my chest. After some time, maybe 10 minutes, I'm not really sure how long it was, the heat faded and then everything seemed normal again, and I fell asleep holding the stones. I was kind of freaked out the next day, but didn't think it was real. Maybe I dreamed it all up, even though I woke up holding the stones. So I went about my day and such until the night returned. I lay down for bed once again. The heat and vibrations returned, almost immediately. I was a bit more prepared this time, so I tried to focus the sensation and make some kind of barrier around myself with it. I don't really know what I was doing or if it even worked, but I started seeing the light again. This time, I had completely turned off my computer and all electronics, so it was pitch black in the room, no light at all. Yet when I opened my eyes this time, I saw a light in the room. It was over by where I heard the noise the first time. It moved. There was smoke or mist within the light, and it kind of floated around my bed until it was at the foot of my bed. It wasn't bright at all, just a very subtle glow that made the smoky mist visible in the darkness of my room. The light shifted between purple and white again, sometimes being a pinkish colour. I sat up and once again grabbed the stones and then stared at it. The pulsating light extended from the ceiling down to the floor and just hung there in the air at the foot of my bed. I don't know how long I stared at it in silence, but eventually it faded away and I laid back down. Once again, my dog just laid there, totally oblivious to everything that was happening. I fell asleep and woke up holding the stones again. Last night, basically the same thing happened. Previously, when this kind of stuff happened to me, it was only once and then it didn't happen again for a long time, and I could brush it off and forget about it. Convinced that it was just something weird that my brain was doing, or it was a dream of some kind. 3 nights in a row where I'm most definitely awake and physically feeling and seeing shit? That's new and has me wondering what the hell is going on. Am I going crazy? I thought I had slipped through, not being afflicted with any mental illnesses, but now I'm full of doubt. Maybe it was just late manifesting itself and now I'm losing my mind. Otherwise, there's something visiting me while I sleep. I don't think either of those options are good, and I have no idea what to do about it. Has anyone had a similar experience or have any advice on how I can deal with this? I'm sitting here not wanting to go lay down because it's just going to happen again. I know you can go without sleep for a few days, but I'd really like to get some frickin' rest. I've had something haunting me my entire life. My older sister, who's had the same experiences, believes it happened when we played with a Ouija board without knowing the possible consequences. Anyway, the point of this post is that I thought it was gone. 2+ smudgings, but tonight makes me believe it's not. I also say demon because it tries to scare and or upset me and tends to bring the foul odour of feces. From what I've learned over the years, demons have a foul odour and can get their energy from negative emotions. Tonight, I was taking a short nap after Thanksgiving with the family. I was woken up by a strong smell of feces. Now I have cats, so it's entirely possible it was one of them having a particularly bad night. However, the litter boxes are on the opposite side of the house, and it was so strong that realistically, the cat would have to poop right next to my bed, or someone would have to have waved it under my nose or something. Neither of those were the case. So I wake up, trying to ignore the smell, thinking it was a particularly bad night for one of those cats, and go to my computer to relax. I'm not sure how much time was in between my waking up and this next incident, but it was at least a couple of hours. I look down towards my tower, and I see my cat that I had to put to sleep 2 weeks ago, only it was his dead, lifeless body. This is different from all the other times I've seen these cats since he's passed. This is particularly upsetting because I loved that cat like he was my child, and he only lived half of his life, but his body was shutting down on him. This thing knows how to get to me, and I think it never left, just grew weak. And now that my family has been dealing with an early loss, it's gained some strength back. I'm Native American and I live in a First Nation community. It matters to this post because so much history has happened on this land. Also, my neighbour has a sweat lodge and is a good person, but practices bad medicine. My cousin went twice, and each time a dark human-shaped figure followed him back home. I have countless stories that happen to me personally, and endless stories that happen to family in my community and other First Nation communities. I'm only going to type some of mine. I won't list them in order, but I live alone and a strip of huge cedar trees separates my home and my neighbours that have the sweat lodge. I don't have any mental stuff like schizophrenia, and I drink a few times a year. I smoke weed, but not that much. Green orb. 3 years ago, my sister lived with me. I just closed my bedroom door, turned off the light, and laid my head down. My window is locked, with closed blinds, a blanket thumbtacked, and my room is pitch black. I can't see my hand in front of my eyes. The only light is my alarm clock I have on top of my shelf. Seconds after I laid my head down, a basketball-sized green translucent orb came through my door. I could see my alarm clock. The orb was bright but didn't give off light. A flickered light illuminates the room. This orb was bright and translucent, but my room was pitch black. It made a U-shape from the window and my ceiling and hovered above my face. Then the way water flushes down a toilet is absorbed into my left arm. At this point I yelled out, "What the fuck? God, don't let the aliens take me." Then I yelled for my sister. She ran in and didn't believe me. Red orbs. My left neighbour has a sweat lodge. My right neighbour is my gran, and our homes are very close and share a driveway. My sister would smoke outside, and a few times at 3 a.m, she would see a floating red orb. Always at the edge of the brush. My gran saw the red orb, same time, but it was right outside my sister's bedroom window. I saw this red orb. It was right outside my side door, 1 metre from the ground, but 5 metres from the door, in between my grandparents. I thought about going outside, but I just prayed. Anytime one of us see these orbs, we all had terrible or tortured and haunted dreams that night. Voices, eh? I used to clean while listening to YouTube stories about skinwalkers. At the end of one, they said a skinwalker's name. I remember thinking ever stupid. I think it triggered my sister and I hearing each other's names for a while. I was doing the dishes and I heard her say Brittany, except it was from my feet, underneath the sink. Also, for both of us when this happened, it would sound similar to in real life, but also like telepathy. She would hear me call her name too. It was always when we weren't in the same room. Voice B. When my sister moved out, I lived with 2 cats. One time around 3:15 a.m, I was awoken by my dad's voice going, "Hey!" It was so loud, my cats ran from my room. I jumped and prayed. He lives down the road from me. He didn't answer my text, and then next said he confirmed that at exactly that time he yelled "hey" in the same tone of voice. He almost won Pug G or Pug 1 and lost. Not sure how these things happen. Church bells. I barely ever drink. One of the times I did, it was late in the morning, and as I was walking to the bathroom, loud old-style church bells rang 3 times. Creepy spirit. This one is so creepy. I was at my mom's house. My 20-year-old sister just left to go back to our home, and my mom was in the tub. I was cleaning downstairs. I felt this urge to look behind me, and I saw a child-sized version of my sister. She was on her knees, held her head in her hands, and was looking at me from the couch. She then ducked down, hiding, and I ran over and it was gone. Also, instead of having a face, it was all hair. Weird ghost thing. Back to my neighbour practicing bad medicine. It was nighttime and I had my windows open. I was smoking weed and I closed the window because I felt bad energy. My sister ran into my room and said to call the cops. There was screaming coming from the cedar trees. I said no. Listen carefully. That's paranormal screaming. It's not a human scream. It was like a cross between animals and humans screaming. Some weird, like gross chanting. And also, it felt like a wave of water and heavy wind in terms of evil energy flowing over us, coming from the cedar trees. So often we would sleep together because creepy things were happening outside. My sister moved out sadly, but the second time this happened, I was alone. It was the summer before I'd moved for college. My cats would move to the next door with my grandparents, but I still wanted to teach them to be brave. The same screaming woke my cats and I up, but the energy just felt so evil. My cats could tell it was supernatural, and they looked so scared. They didn't run from the bed when I got out of bed. Then I walked into that room, my cats following. I was yelling and praying and banging on those windows with a flashlight at all those evil screams. It didn't stop, so I went back to my bedroom window and banged there, yelling and praying at these demonic spirits. Then this pure white solid man-shaped figure sprinted out of those woods and looked directly at me. I was so scared, I dropped to the floor and laid there for hours. I think I waited till sunrise to sleep. Aliens. Now I can go on and on. My cousin and I, when I lived with my parents, we would hang out all night on my porch and at the lake and look for these weird stars. Now before you say they're planes or satellites, they aren't. They were stars, but red and white. They would remain stationary while these red stars would move around in different shapes like scribbles and disappear. Or like the sun or moon follows you when driving. The red stars would move similar to an airplane in terms of leaving the white stars stationary, but it would follow us down the road, stop when we did, and follow us back home. So one night, my cousin banged on my window with a friend. They were drunk. I was sober. I fed them and walked them home. They lived 2 hours down. I stopped them and said, "Holy shit, there were 9 red stars in the sky." As I said that, they simultaneously started to move. The 9 red stars formed 3 triangles each. Then, the 3 slowly moved towards each other and then formed one big triangle. The 9 red stars and huge triangle slowly lowered from the sky and, shockingly, lowered beneath the tree line, and I could see them almost touch the ground. I looked at my cousin, and that sucker abandoned me and was sprinting and almost at her front door. I did the same and hid under my covers. Banging. I hate this one. My sister's room leads to the back of the brush. It's very hard to push open, it's always locked. At 3 a.m, 3 times in a row, we heard a huge bang and the door slammed open. I put on several weight and this hasn't happened since, but it has mostly happened during nightmares. My sister has bad ones, but they're getting better. Unwilling astral projection. This makes me mad and irritated. My grandpa had surgery and is completely amazing and healed now. But at the time he was really scared. After his surgery, he missed church for the first time. I don't go often, but I went and I wrote down everything. When I got home, I was reading to him and 3 knocks happened from their back door. I pretend I didn't hear it. He asked me if I did, and I confirmed I heard it too. I didn't have to look to know nothing was there. We prayed together after. So mean, these spirits. In our culture, the 3 knock thing doesn't symbolize anything good. When my grandpa goes away for meetings, I sleep over with my gram and sleep in his room. She sleeps in a different room. Last time, I dreamt that all of their radios had gross chanting and it was very static. I astral projected, and unwillingly, and as I was watching myself sleep. I said God's name, and I was back in my body, and I woke up. As I did, my grandpa's bathroom door slowly opened. I just prayed. The first time I astral projected, I was at my house. I again was floating at the ceiling, watching myself sleep, but there was this creature chanting demonic stuff on the floor in my corner. I kept trying to say God's name, and I was muted. After a while, I finally said it, and I was back in my body, and rolled over and went to sleep. So the first thing I want to put out is I had multiple paranormal experiences throughout my life, from age 5, even till this very day. A little about me is I'm an empath, and I can read people's energy. And I don't know if that's the reason I have paranormal experiences, but I'm going with a yes. I could tell you all my stories, but I want to tell you one of my experiences that takes the cake. So I was about 18, and I still lived with my parents at the time. I was sitting at the kitchen table one day, watching one of my favourite shows on my laptop. The show I was watching was Ghost Adventures. Ironic, I know. And I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, well, you were watching a ghost show, so you probably got scared or paranoid, or it's probably the sound from the show. Well, I hate to burst your theory, sadly, but you're wrong. So as I was saying, I was sitting watching Ghost Adventures when I felt a presence coming towards me, but I ignored it. I usually ignore anything paranormal, so they don't bother me, and eventually they get the hint, but sometimes they don't. This spirit didn't. So if you've ever seen Ghost Adventures, you know that they show a scene as it comes to an end. And in one of the episodes, the last scene, Zach was sitting on the couch talking to the spirits when a lamp moved across the table. As soon as that happens, I paused the show because I felt the presence behind me. And I'm not kidding you guys. I hear a man's voice whisper in my ear saying, "Oh, that's crazy." I felt his warm breath on my ear. After that, I asked him respectfully to not do that ever again and to walk away. And he did. So when my grandma was alive, I was really close to her. And I used to call her Mommy. My grandma was very protective over me because I was born really sick. She would yell or fight anybody who she thought was a threat to me or my health. My grandma passed away in 1999, so I was 3 years old at the time. Her death was very traumatic for me. I remember being at her funeral and my aunt telling me to try not to wake her up because she'll be sleeping for a long time. And of course, I didn't fully understand what my aunt was talking about and decided to try and wake her up. I remember saying to my grandma, "Mama, wake up," and "Mama, please wake up." as I put my toddler hand on her chest, shaking her to wake up. I remember my shock when feeling the coldness of her body. I told my aunt to get Mama a blanket so she wouldn't freeze. After saying that, people started crying more, and then nothing, because I can't remember after that part. The next day, we went to visit a grave, and I remember asking my mom, "Where's Mama at?" My mom pointed and told me that she was underneath the ground. And I freaked out and tried to dig my grandma out of the ground with my hands so she could get out after her long nap. I got frustrated because I couldn't get her and started crying. Anyways, 4 months after her death, I went to get my heart surgery because I was born with 2 holes in my heart. I remember waking up after surgery to see a young woman holding my hand as she smiled at me. There was no talking, just her staring at me with so much love for me in her eyes. She started rubbing my head after she tucked me in. It was so soothing. After a while, I started falling back asleep. I felt her giving me a kiss on the forehead and heard her footsteps as she walked away from me. I didn't know who she was, but I felt like I knew her. Years later, my mom showed me pictures of my grandma when she was younger, and I was shocked by what we saw. The young woman who was being so caring to me was my grandma. I think my grandma came to visit me to see if I was okay. She knew I was getting the surgery before she died, so I think she just wanted to just be there for me. I used to live in the Philippines, and the house I lived in was built when the Philippines was being occupied by Japan during World War II. It had 2 small walkways, one at the side of the house and one at the back of the house. At the corner where the 2 walkways meet is where my dog's huge wooden doghouse was. I say huge because I could literally go in and sleep in it comfortably, and I was a huge kid of 12 years old. One night, I was told by my uncle to go and feed Casper. Of course, I said yes right away because I wanted to play with my dog, so I went. Now, Casper is a happy dog, always running around and always happy to see any of my family. But that night was different. While I was walking towards his doghouse, I realised that I didn't hear him barking or running around. So I thought he was at the back walkway, so I just continued towards the doghouse. It was nighttime around 8 o'clock. I stopped halfway through when I noticed that Casper was inside the doghouse. Now this was worrisome, for he always runs at me when he sees me, so I thought maybe something was wrong, like he was sick or whatever, so I quickened my pace to get to him. Once I got there though, he seemed fine. I put down the food next to him and filled up his water bowl and had no reaction whatsoever. Casper was just staring towards the back hallway. I got curious, so I looked towards where he was looking at, and what I saw still gives me chills when I remember that day. I saw a man standing there, just staring at me with a blank expression. He was wearing some type of military uniform and was holding a rifle. I'm not a gun expert, so I can't tell you all what kind it was. At the tip of the gun rested a bayonet. What got me focused on what it was a bloody bayonet. At that point, I was just frozen. I remember the fear and thinking, this is it. Someone is here and he's going to kill me. I don't quite remember what made me look away from the bayonet, but when I did, the first thing I noticed was how the man was now missing half of his face. Seeing him only have half of a face jolted me out of my frozen state, and I ran for it. I didn't care to look back to see if he was following me or not. I even tackled my uncle, who was coming to check on me. I cried so hard when I realised that I was on top of my uncle. He took me inside and waited for me to stop crying. I fell asleep and then from crying. The next morning, my uncle talked to me about what happened, and I told him everything. He was genuinely worried when I finished because he told me that I was out there in the walkway for an hour, and it was the reason why he was coming to check on me. He also told me that I wasn't the only one to experience such things in the house. I later found out what the uniform the man was wearing was the standard Japanese military uniform at the time of World War II. I was playing a game on my phone whilst listening to music when I decided to look out the window and at the other house's windows. All the curtains were open on every house we were passing, yet only light made it through them. I thought this was normal and looked back at my phone. Whilst my dad was doing the roundabout, I decided to look out the window again. In one of the windows I saw was a woman. She was slim and had her hips on one side and her chest to the other, as well as being very black. So black in fact that I couldn't make out what she was wearing on her face, like a silhouette. Still though, I thought nothing of it and continued playing. I wish I didn't, but I did, and looked out the window one last time after a couple of minutes. The exact same woman was in the same window in every house. She just stared at me, not a care in the world. I tried telling my brother and my parents, but they disregarded me. I was genuinely scared, and I didn't want to leave the car. I was forced to, but when I did, I immediately rushed towards the door, praying that the woman wouldn't answer. Luckily it wasn't, and for a good hour or two, I felt safe. However, my phone died, so I went to one of the bedrooms to charge it. I also decided to relax a little, and I lay down on the bed. I couldn't help but shake the feeling of being watched. There was only one window in the room, so I looked over there. And there she was, still pitch black. This time, she wasn't in a normal position. Her fingers were beside her hips, and her head rotated to look at me. I obviously screamed, and I ran out of the bedroom without my phone. My parents got worried and came. I tried to tell them everything, but they didn't really buy it, and we left early because they thought I would ruin the game. I didn't look out of the windows for the rest of the trip. It was 3 years ago, and I've gone over it since, but I've never seen her since. But what I didn't realise then was that all the bedrooms in the house were on the second floor. I know no one will believe me, but at least I've got that off my chest. I leave my front door wide open at night. I also make sure that the sliding door in my kitchen is too wide open and the screen door removed. I check every night for any closed windows in my house and open them. I put my valuables on the dining table and my most prized trophies on an easily accessible shelf in my living room. I always try to remind myself to make sure that my 2 bedroom doors, my bathroom door, my garage and my gun rack are unlocked and open. All of my floors are carpet to help dampen the sound of footsteps, and I make sure the hinges on my house's doors and knobs are extra oiled so they won't make a single sound when they're being pushed open. I put in earplugs and a blindfold and snore loudly to signal that I'm asleep. I also make sure that I get 2 of the latest 40 to 50 inch flat screen TVs with 4K, and I choose the ones that are specifically easy to install, uninstall and reinstall, and put the second TV in my guest bedroom. I also have the latest generation of gaming consoles and a $5,000 computer that I meticulously built from the ground up. I also have more than 500 of the greatest games in total, both on PC and console. When I first got this house, the first thing I did was reinstall my power box on the outside of the house so that it can easily be disarmed from the outside. I have no outside lamp, no camera and pets or animals of any kind. Coincidentally, this house is the farthest from any cell towers or police station. I live in an abandoned neighbourhood with no neighbours, and I have no fence. I also put my social security number, credit card, and $600 worth of Yu-Gi-Oh cards right beside my trophy collection, and if I'm subscribed to any paid services, I make sure to write down the information on a piece of paper and stick it into my fridge. In my garage, I have 2 $1,000 bikes and a motorcycle that can put anything you can think of to shame. Finally, if I clean. If heaven is dirty, then take me to hell, because I'll be damned if I'm living in a dirty house. I don't consider a spot clean unless I can eat it. All my shoes are put through the washer, and if I even suspect it of being dirty, I manually hand wash it myself. I take long hot showers with soap, both with a bar and in a liquid. I put on 3 brands of shampoo and 3 brands of conditioner, 3 brands of deodorizer when I'm done taking a shower. I clean it too. I floss each tooth of mine and do 10 minutes of brushing with an electric toothbrush. And finally, I mouthwash. If you haven't got the message yet, I'm trying to make people break into my house. Because if they do, they'll be the new owner of the house and be unable to leave it. They will own everything inside it, including my hunger, you know? That gnawing sensation as though a black hole has taken residence in your intestines. Never will they be able to satisfy this one need, and never will they be able to die from it. Or from anything so long as they own the place. They will live in a clean house as a husk, and they too would want to clean it to increase the temptation of taking something from it. I know somebody would take the bait. After all, it worked for me. I lived on the second floor of an old apartment building. Recently, everybody on the first floor moved out. It was slow at first. A family moved out after their baby wouldn't stop crying. A couple felt something wrong while they were having sex, and police arrested the person who lived below me because they shot at the floor due to what they called hand rats, which is not what it sounds like by the end of this. There's a housing problem from where I live, and many people were eager to take the old homes of my first floor neighbours. However, they'd usually last about 6 months before moving back out. The longest I've seen someone stay was about a year, but they were batshit crazy at that point. One day, when I was returning home from work, I spotted the landlord, Adam, looking down at me from the roof. Now, I happen to be friends with the landlord, and I know that he isn't suicidal, so I got 2 beers from my fridge, went to the roof, and offered him one. Of course, he said yes to a bottle of natural light beer. We both looked at the town around us. It was crime-ridden, drug-ridden, all the worst kinds of ridden. The only driver it wasn't was the police. I looked over at Adam, and completely at random I asked, "Hey, do the people on the first floor always move out after just moving in?" Adam broke a sweat. "They're not dying." "What?" "Not enough people are dying, and now they're coming for us." "What do you mean?" Adam pointed to the apartment building across the street. "Look at that one. Know how many people died in there? How many times have you been woken up to the sound of gunshots every night because of what goes on across the street?" I looked at him, then back at the building. "Yeah, too many times to count." Adam shook his head and sat on his knees. In the past few months, they've been getting less and less police calls, less and less murders. They have their own security team. People have been dying there less. I moved away from him for a bit. Isn't that a good thing?" He cut me off. "Look at the building beside us. They've had a prostitution and drug problem there for decades. Now they hold free rehab sessions every Saturday and are practically surrounded with undercover cops trying to dismantle the prostitution I yelled, "Hey, why is all this a bad thing?" Adam stood up, chugged the rest of his beer, then looked at me and he said, "You'll find out." He threw his bottle in the trash can below and walked away, leaving me. Over the coming months, our relationship soured more. He clearly liked the problems that plagued the other buildings, and I always found it douchey of him. But in the end, he was right. I would have still had my other hand had the other buildings not improved. A year passed, and people have started leaving only after living in the first floor apartment for 3 months. People on the higher floors were getting just as concerned as I. One of the people below me, a female cosplayer named Chloe, was planning on moving out after only living on the first floor for a month. Apparently, her complaints of her clothing being ripped went unanswered. A few weeks later, I saw her heading towards Adam's apartment in order to give the key. Just as she was about to knock on the door, I stopped her. I said, "Hey, can I borrow the key before you give it to Adam?" "Borrow? Take it. It's not mine to deal with anymore." She then dropped the key into my hands and walked away. I contemplated giving it to Adam, but he's been too distant. I decided to do some investigating. That night, I went downstairs to Chloe's old apartment and unlocked the door. The entire apartment was filled with nothing but concrete pillars. It was hard to navigate around them. They were so tightly packed together. I couldn't imagine living here for a week, let alone a month or 3, or a year. I touched one of the pillars. They felt unsettling. I left after 2 minutes. I was planning on going to Adam and giving back the key, saying the previous tenant dropped it. But my body moved on its own, and before I knew it, I was laying down on my bed, about to fall asleep. I almost died that night. I felt that same feeling, that same unsettling feeling I got from touching one of those damn pillars. Except that feeling was wrapped around my ankle. But I didn't panic, even though I felt it again around my wrist as well. I only panicked when it was around my neck. I opened my eyes in panic as I realised I wasn't breathing. I didn't turn off all the lights when I fell asleep, and I saw 2 more hands emerge, attempting to grab my other free hand and leg. I looked over at my dresser and reached it with my free hand, the concrete coming closer and my breath ever fading. I opened the drawer, but from where I was laying, I couldn't see what was in it. I was panicking. I needed to feel for a curved piece of wood. I felt round metal and the grasp of the hand on my neck tightening. I felt as though I was about to pass out. I almost did. Just as my eyes went black, my hand acted on its own, and I shot the hand holding my neck with a sawn-off shotgun. I immediately retreated, and I shot the concrete hand holding onto my ankle. Some shrapnel hit my foot, but I was too panicked to care. The other hand was able to grab the shoe of my other foot, and I immediately kicked it away, my shoe going with it. I immediately got up, but I realised there was one more hand holding onto my wrist, and more wanting my other hand, and several more slowly rising up. Even with one hand made of concrete holding onto my wrist, I was still able to come up with enough force and speed to run out of my window. Just as I was about to fall onto the dumpster below, the concrete hand broke my fall midway and slowly began to rise up. I panicked. I wasn't thinking straight. A flurry of emotions, dreams, and things I wanted to do flew around my head. I started crying as my free hand reached into my pocket and pulled out a switchblade. I started screaming shortly after. It's been 2 weeks since that night. I've been typing this entire thing with one hand, as painful and tedious as it is, but I have to get the story out there. I've been living with a friend whilst I find another place to crash. A couple hours ago, the local news reported that the old apartment building had apparently closed. All of the tenants suffocated to death. They were found within the floorboards. The prison I work in holds no prisoners. It's pretty weird, yes. The only time I get to see them is when they arrive. The guards have to stand in a line facing the new inmates as they head into the prison, never to be seen again. I don't know what's weirder. The fact that our prison doesn't have a name, or that we never see the inmates at all. Not to mention, some of their sentences are pretty harsh considering what they're being convicted for. All the prisoners are on death row. However, we're not in charge of giving the executions. That's the job of the warden himself to deal with. When you hear death row, you usually think the worst of the worst. The people who you wouldn't mind they commit suicide one morning. But these prisoners' bad deeds range from gambling, intoxication, over-smoking, and sometimes, for some fucking reason, sex. That's right, some prisoners are put on death row here for having sex. Every part of the prison is completely divided via airlock doors that need administration's approval for entry and exit. So if you want to make it to the cell blocks, you need to radio in with them. And yes, there are airlocks for the men's and women's bathroom each. All prison personnel are not allowed to be in the same parts as the prisoners. So if they're in the cafeteria, we can't be in there, or in the kitchen either. If you fail to finish your duties, let's say cleaning in time, you're getting a reduced pay for that week. And if you ever wind up in the same areas as the inmates, you're considered dead, and a letter is sent home to your loved ones. It's really backwards if you think about it. The inmates who are on death row practically have ample opportunity to escape at literally any point they want to. I mean, it's not like the guards can do anything about it, because we literally can't. But our job isn't to think about that. Our job is to make sure nobody gets in or out. I don't know. And personally, I don't want to know. I've seen the stories online. How people's curiosities and attitudes lead them towards a life of torment and pain. I've seen and heard all the warning signs to get to know that not some, but a lot of things in life are much better left unknown rather than anything else. So I never questioned it. Never gave it one thought of my mind in my 15 years of serving this prison. And never, ever did the unanswered question ever consume me to the point where I just had to know. Unfortunately, I couldn't say the same things for one of my work friends. His name was Sebastian. He was in his mid-20s, was a fucking idiot, and therefore was always curious. He told me his dream job was to work for NASA or SpaceX or any company studying space. He always loved learning and loved talking about education. That and the weird-ass prison we worked in. I think it was about 2 years of working there that he completely broke and decided to do some investigating on his own. Reception, administration, the warden, not even some guards were willing to say anything to him. And eventually, all of his pent-up curiosity was finally answered to him with his death. It was 11 p.m, the time when all the prisoners were asleep. I was on the night shift, making sure everybody besides some guards and janitors were off the site. Sebastian wasn't supposed to be on site today, so I was pretty surprised to see him there. He was very distinguishable from the other guards, what with his baby blue eyes and his almost perfectly white hair, not to mention his under-average height. I asked him, "What the fuck are you doing here?" Sebastian stammered, Just doing some overtime." I knew it was bullshit, and he did too. We didn't do overtime at this nameless prison. He knew that I knew it was bullshit, so I told him, "Follow me outside, come on," and he complied. We walked together from the indoor courtyard to the indoor gym, to the indoor administration, where he was given a stern talking to by the head of security, and eventually to the outdoor area, when that son of a gun tased me till I blacked out cold. I was awoken by the head of security, where he told me that he climbed into the vents, what with his small stature and all. My job was to track him, as he was moving fast and I was the only one who knew him really well. Administration gave me permission to check every single part of the prison. I only asked to check the cell box. They told me it was suicide because that was where all the prisoners were being held. I told them that Sebastian would be there or I would quit tomorrow morning. They let me through. I ran as fast as I could. From the indoor administration to the indoor gym, through the indoor courtyard to where I was stopped by an airlock. I radioed in with the reception. "The fuck? I thought I just said to let me through the cell blocks." The only reply I got was static. "I told them otherwise," said a deep voice behind my back. I turned around and saw a man wearing a two-piece business suit and a pure Damascus 14K gold sunglasses. He had no face, no ears, no hair, and his skin was pure grey. He was the warden. I need to be let in here. He's going to be considered dead, but I can still save him." He ignored my statement, walked over to me and said, "Do you ever wonder what we keep in here? What kind of sick and twisted things are stored in this prison with no name? What kind of people come in here with deeds so vile you just want to kill them yourselves?" Just as he finished talking, I heard yelling from the other side of the airlock. "Help me! Open the airlock now!" I looked through a window on the airlock to see a faint silhouette of a man. The warden continued on. "Well, we don't house inmates in this prison." As the screaming man came running at full speed towards the airlock door, I saw a horrific sight. "We house wolves." The screaming man was Sebastian, and his face was mauled off. You could see his skull. His left eye was missing, and his other eye was crying blood. He was begging to open the door, all while me and the warden stood there watching him. One man stood in defeat. The other showed no emotion. Not with his stance, not with his head, not with anything. "These wolves," the warden continued, "are the addictions of man. Smoking, gambling, killing. Yes, even sex. They're all here as the beings they really are. Wolves slowly chowing down on their prey." Suddenly, a pair of 8 footsteps came ever closer, and Sebastian slowly stopped yelling and started to just cry. As he realised that his only hope had abandoned him, symbolised through the warden, walking away from the airlock. The last thing he said to me was, "When you're done here, you're fired." I ignored him and watched as Sebastian stopped crying and began screaming, not for help, not for me or for the warden, but in agony and pain. He was eaten alive from the bottom up by the wolves of curiosity. Me and a team of 3 others have been working on a paranormal investigator series, Project X, where we visit different places in the UK and try to debunk the ghost stories. We were made up of 2 skeptics and 2 half-believers, but the wealth of evidence and experiences we encountered at Clapham Wood has changed everything for all of us. The woods are a very creepy place, and we were warned before we went that we needed to be covert, as the locals do not take kindly to investigators. There's a long history of accusations that cult rituals take place in the woods, and that's exactly the vibe we felt when we arrived. We first went early in the afternoon and immediately felt unwelcome. We felt nauseous and paranoid, and also encountered some noises we couldn't explain. We also collected an EVP that sounds like it's saying, "You're standing on my grave." EVP collected at Clapham Wood. This was just the start of the weirdness. When we returned at night, someone had bound a crucifix from 2 pieces of wood and placed it by the entrance to ward us off. It worked. We were followed back to our hotel, and that night, 2 of us had visions of cloaked figures lurking in our room. We returned the next morning and came across evidence that an amateur ritual had taken place the night before, and also collected a second EVP. The cross was there when we returned, but had been moved when we left, despite it being 4:30 a.m, and us not encountering anyone else in the woods. For weeks after, we felt like the woods were calling back, and eventually decided to check it out again. When we headed back, the strangeness started again. As we walked into the woods, a faint drumming began, almost mimicking a heartbeat. Our episodes are pretty long, but you can hear the drumming in this episode from around 10 minutes in. Paranoia and nausea set in again, and we had to leave. Before we left, there was one other piece of strangeness. The atmosphere went from dark to hella dark instantly, like someone switching out a light in the sky. We managed to capture this on camera, and we cannot explain this. These little instances have been enough to convince us of something, but we're not sure what. I love cats. I love them so much. I want to adopt as many as possible and have them all sleep on my bed so I can watch the little cuties nap all day. The issue is, I'm allergic to them. I've lived with a roommate who had a cat and loved it. Waking up with my eyes swollen, forgot to take my meds the night before. Not so much. Sadly, my dream of having a furry friend got put off until I could get my life in order. I figured if I could get into routine, I could easily add taking pills onto it, so I could adopt a cat. I moved out of that apartment with my old college roommate into a condo my uncle wanted to sell. The condo has these electric baseboard heaters that I think are a fire hazard, and so did my uncle. He couldn't live with himself if he sold the place, and it burned down afterwards, because he didn't replace the heaters. But to put in a different system costs a lot. More than he could afford. In the end, he figured he would sell his place and then move into the condo after it all got spruced up. That may take him a year or so to finally get around to doing it. The people in my family all had a bad habit of putting things off. In the meantime, he let me rent out the place. I only stayed for a short amount of time. My plan was to find a job in my field and move if needed. Then the pandemic hit and most employees figured out they could have people work from home. The months passed by and I had a job, but I didn't have any plans or reason to move. My uncle never bothered me to leave, and I wanted to see how long it may take him to finally get ready for the home renos in the condo. Since living here, I've noticed a few feral cats outside. My heart broke seeing them out there. Cold, wet, alone and dirty. I've heard some people go on about how it's good for cats to live outside, but the native bird population might have something else to say about that. Seeing those cats outside with rounded eyes from frostbite and God knows what diseases frustrated me enough to want to snap at anyone trying to bring up the outside argument. But that's not what this is about. It's about the mistake I made. I started putting food outside for the cats with a plan of buying a trap to get them fixed. If they were too feral, they needed to be put back outside, but if possible, I wanted them to find a nice and warm home. I needed to get them in a trusting mood before I got out the traps and risked scaring them all away. Now, I understand it's not just the cats that eat the food. They might be lucky to get some early in the night. Other animals like raccoons, possums and skunks ate what they wanted. My condo had a very small backyard made up mostly of cement squares from the previous owners. The wooden fence is very much in need of repairs and the gate is crooked. One board of the fence fell off, and that's how the animals are getting to the steps by the back door. I didn't mind. I loved to see them all when I couldn't sleep at night. I even named some of the skunks. You really shouldn't feed wild animals for so many reasons. I kept telling myself I would stop the moment I caught all the cats and took care of them. I only caught one who came by in the daytime and dropped him off at a shelter. No one came for him, and he got adopted out soon after he recovered from being outside. That kept me going. I hated the thought of any cat going hungry because I stopped putting food outside. In the middle of the night, I heard noises coming from outside. My bedroom window overlooks a small backyard and the small patch of trees beyond it. I figured it was the skunks from it being around 3 a.m. I needed to use the washroom and felt awake. Normally I got a snack, looked to see what cute nighttime guest came by, and then headed to bed. I didn't turn on the kitchen light. I kept the bathroom one on upstairs, and how the layout worked, the light reached downstairs, letting me see enough to move around. Peanut butter toast sounded like a good late-night snack. I placed the bread in the toaster and then walked over to the sliding glass door to see what showed up that night. I didn't see anything at first. The first floor windows opened a little so I could hear that rustling sound again. There was something behind the fence. I sometimes heard a raccoon climbing up before I saw them. Or maybe they heard me inside and started to climb away. I held still, trying to make no noise and hope it made the creature brave enough to show itself. A different sound replaced the rustling. Something like a long, high-pitched inhale. I nearly let out a scream when I saw the source of the sound came. A face slowly started to peek over the back fence. Like a nightmare, that pale face kept rising upwards until it was a few feet over the top of the worn-down wooden fence. This had to be a prank. That fence was at least 6 feet tall, and this face stood 4 feet above that. This face wasn't natural. It looked impossibly long and stretched out. If I wasn't so scared, I would think it might look a bit funny in a gruesome sort of way. The head on the long neck moved forwards, and I jumped when a sound came inside my house. Just the toaster. The damn thing nearly gave me a heart attack. When I looked back, the pale naked thing started to climb over the fence, while still making that horrible sharp sound. The eyes dark and pulled downwards, along with all the other facial features. I didn't stay long enough to try and figure out if this thing had a gender. I turned to run towards the front door and tripped over a table I found in trash I've been meaning to fix up. The long creature is already at the back door. By the time I got back to my feet, shin throbbing in pain, it smashed the back door open with massively long hands. People do really stupid things when they're scared to death. With the table in my way and the creature so close, I didn't run to safety outside, but instead I ran upstairs. I felt fingertips brush against the back of my shirt as I ran, nearly falling forwards up the steps. I only looked back the moment I got inside the bathroom to see that thing's pale outline standing at the bottom of the stairs, face showing a smile that could stop your heart. It reached out a hand, the arm so long it nearly cleared the entire length of the steps and to the bathroom door. I slammed it shut with a very loud scream. The bathroom was the only room in the house with a lock. I didn't think it would hold. The handle moved slightly, then harder. I don't know how long that thing wiggled the handle and banged on the door trying to get inside. I didn't even have any weapons besides some cleaning chemicals. Finally, the sound stopped. There wasn't a window in the bathroom, so I didn't know how long I sat on the floor for, cowering in fear. I left my phone on the kitchen counter to charge the night before. The time passed slowly, making me feel every second of it. I didn't hear any sounds for a while and started to see some light coming from under the door frame. With bravery I didn't think I had, I unlocked the door, peeking outside, seeing no signs of the monster. I carefully went downstairs, my entire body shaking. The window was still broken, but nothing else touched besides a torn open bag of dry cat food scattered on the ground. I pressed against the wall trying to get to my phone. I kept my recycling bins at the end of the kitchen counter. My kitchen and living room are all in the same room, but with one long counter to divide them. I got closer and noticed that the empty week-old cans of wet canned food from the bins had been placed on the counter in a stack. I'd stopped buying it because it cost so much and thought I could get more dry food for less. Or a flyer. Someone wrote one word in dirt from outside in long, thin letters, as if the words were written in fingertip. More. I called the police, fixed the back glass door and set up a camera outside. My uncle was just happy I was safe from whoever broke in. I could never tell him the real truth. I just said a crazy, naked, tall, homeless guy broke the back door and I hid in the bathroom until he left. My uncle offered to let him stay with him, but I didn't want to burden someone else with the creature I'd attracted by putting wet cat food outside. I've stayed and put aside money for more wet food. I haven't seen anything besides the regular animals in the cameras, but I don't dare stop putting out the good stuff and risk that tall monster breaking in again. At least now I'm more focused on getting the feral cats caught, fixed and shots up to date. It's the least I can do for them. I have terrible nightmares from that night. I fear that the creature may come again when I'm sleeping, so I've started going to bed during the day. My life has changed in a lot of ways that aren't all that great. Please do me a favour, and if you're going to feed feral cats, know that you're doing ahead of time. Don't make the same mistake as me. You really never know what's coming by, and eating the food you're leaving out